how people approach death is probably as unique as our fingerprint, I would imagine. Like it's very, in subtle ways, it's different. And we're bringing lifetimes of experience and perspectives that impact how we die. And yet the actual dying process is very similar. And so when I think about the great equalizer that is death, that spares no one, it's like I see our shared humanity in those moments. I really feel into what unity consciousness must feel like when I'm at the bedside in those moments. And I would say that there's value in talking about death and preparing for death before you reach that point. Because I've seen deaths that I would call, we say conscious dying. And what I mean by that is a dying experience that involves everyone going in with their eyes wide open, their hearts open to what is. So, no, looking at denial, looking at fear and its place and how it's impacting the experience, but really being very present with what is. So that's what I mean by conscious dying. And those deaths and those experiences are worth prepping for.
Welcome to Therapist Uncensored. Building on decades of professional experience, this podcast tackles neurobiology, modern attachment, and more in an honest way that's helpful in healing humans. Your session begins now with Dr. Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott.
Really proud of our new sponsor, Branch Basics. It's a woman-owned company. They're from Texas. But what I'm really proud of is that they can make our home and our environment much safer. Have you ever wondered what toxic chemical cocktails you're spraying around your home every day? I was. And when I dove into it, it's really changed everything. Those conventional cleaners, including those all-purpose ones that we grew up with, are actually packed with chemicals linked to serious health problems, from respiratory problems, asthma, allergy, even hormone disruptions that can cause reproductive problems, developmental issues for children. You should check the research out on this. Branch Basic eliminates those toxins while it actually works. It's a truly human-safe alternative. No dyes or fragrances. Fragrances are often harmful additives. It's really easy to use. It's one concentrated formula, and it can replace every cleaner in your house. You just dilute it differently for every different purposes. And it's biodegradable, so no synthetic chemicals persisting in our waterways. Yay on that. I also love that they tackled packaging waste problems. You can reusable bottles in your starter kits. You can use either plastic or glass. And as someone passionate about health and our environment, I can genuinely say this company really aligns with it, what we love. So detox your home. Visit branchbasics.com to shop their premium starter kits and save 15% off with code TU at branchbasics.com. So it's 15% off your new Branch Basics premium starter kit at branchbasics.com. And remember, TU for 15% off. Your lungs and your hormones and your planet are all going to thank you.
Aditi Sethi is a hospice and palliative care physician, end-of-life doula, and the founder and executive director of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying in Asheville, North Carolina. She's featured in the film The Last Ecstatic Days, and she's an emerging and integral voice for transforming our cultural understanding of dying, death, and bereavement care. If you haven't seen her TED Talk, I really recommend it. We are putting it in the show notes. It is very moving. It's called The Art of Dying Before You Die. It reflects her passion for inspiring a holistic and sacred approach to the end-of-life journey. Welcome back to Therapist Uncensored. Welcome, Aditi. Would you describe yourself for our audience so they can come to know you in the way that you want to be known?
I am a mother, a lover of the mystical ways of being on this planet, a musician, a community organizer, a physician by trade, and a director of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, a nonprofit, and a perpetual student of life.
Well, I'm interested in so many things that your life work has been around, but I'm curious if you could take us back a little bit about how you got interested in dying and the process of dying and bringing death back to life.
Having grown up in Georgia, I was born in India. We would go back to India to visit. And I remember at a young age being struck by the way life in its fullness was expressed in each moment there. And each snapshot, anywhere you look, there's poverty, there's riches, there's the full expression of life from birth to death. And elders are playing with children, and people are dying in the streets, even in some cases. And then I would absorb all that and see all that without people really talking about that way of being. And then I would come back to the South, and everything was so manicured and hidden from sight. I noticed that was something that was there was some dissonance there for me, but I didn't really understand it. And I think that was the beginning of sort of a feeling of not really being attuned or being clear about my place in the world. Like here I was as an Indian child going back to India. How come I wasn't that beggar on the street? I could see myself in the children, and I was just very confused. So I feel like the first 17 years of my life, I was sort of confused, I would say. I wasn't fully connected to myself, my body, my being. I was conflicted in many ways, and some of that is natural child development, in terms of adolescence, evolution, and all that. But then come 17, I was at a volunteer fair at my undergraduate school, Davidson College near Charlotte. And they really stressed volunteerism. And I walked into this auditorium full of booths, and people were talking about different service opportunities. And the Hospice of Charlotte was there. And this loving woman said, "Hey, come and let me tell you about hospice." And I had grown up in a community of physicians, had never heard of the word hospice. And as she was telling me that as a student, as a person who goes through a hospice training, I could sit at the bedside of people who were dying, and I could serve in that way. There was something that happened in terms of alignment. Everything came into focus in a way that I can't describe. I now have had multiple experiences like that, but it was one of the first times I thought, like, maybe there's something here for me. And so that's how I was exposed to hospice. I went through the volunteer training and volunteered throughout my undergraduate years, which was an odd thing to do as a college student. And then, to feel into the college campus and the life of a college student, and then go to the bedside of a man with HIV dying in affordable housing in downtown Charlotte. It was just such a contrast and so rich. And all I had to do was show up and be present. I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to, my insecurities went away. They just dissolved because there was just pure presence and love. And that, the work of hospice, or that experience with hospice care, stayed with me throughout my medical training. I ultimately went to medical school, and I started noticing how little people were paying attention to death in the medical field, and how a lot of dying people were not tended to in the ways that I knew that were possible. And I saw the grief that emerged as a result, and the pain and actual suffering at times. Certain doctors were uneducated about the use of morphine, for example. Just simple comfort medications that could be used to ease suffering were not being utilized in some cases. And so I became sort of an activist then in my medical school. I brought lunch and learns to campus. I started like, hey, let's just talk about this thing that nobody's talking about. And then my path has continued. I specialized in hospice palliative care, and then worked in a 26-bed inpatient facility here in Asheville for 10 years, and then left to begin this nonprofit, which I spoke of briefly. But that's my journey to this moment.
And do you think that your capacity for the presence that you found yourself in at these bedsides, like, how did that come to be? What you mentioned India, like, I think about a cultural piece. Was it in your family? I mean, a lot of people want to be able to have this presence. And so I'm just kind of interested in, like, how people that really have mastered it, how do you get there? And then certainly there's always then how do you stay there in this world and hurricanes?
Yeah, I found, in being in a community supported end of life care model, which is what the Center for Conscious Living and Dying is, I realize how my ability to be present at the bedside doesn't always translate to social situations or even, professional situations. So I have not mastered it by any means. And I think I was born with a certain awareness, I would say. My father, who has since died, used to say that I came out with a level of an awareness that he noted. It was very unique to him. And I have a son who has a similar sort of an awareness of the subtleties, what lies beneath the surface of the present reality, or So the presence, I would say, in that discomfort, in that confusion, I became an observer. I didn't resonate with a lot of the ways that people interacted, and I just became an observer. And I was a musician at a young age. I was 4 when I started playing the harmonium, an Indian instrument, and 5 taking piano lessons, and then I started singing devotional music. And I think the vibrational quality of devotional music and being in that frequency does impact how I show up in the world. And so I wonder about that. I've never actually pondered the how or the why of that presence, but I think it's also a deep desire to understand the nature of reality and the questions I've always held of what are we doing here? Who am I in relation to my family, in relation to communities, the planet? So I think it's a combination of the curiosity that I've always had and continue to have, and then the lived experience of different frequencies and vibrations and paying attention.
Music. What a wonderful topic and integrator in a lot of ways. I saw, is the instrument that you mentioned what you were playing at the beginning of the TED Talk?
Yes. Yeah. It's called a harmonium.
And when I think about music, I'm just a fan. Like, I love all music, but have zero talent other than appreciating it, which is a good thing to do. But this idea of listening, that listening to music, that we're not listening with our ears so much, and that like it's a full body experience. And can you say a little bit about how music is impacted, or how you use music in the center, and can we weave that in this a little bit?
Yeah. I think for one thing, sound and music is this universal language. It's cross-cultural. It doesn't it impacts.
It's ageless.
Age is timeless. Yeah, it carries its own. My teacher who lives in Varanasi, India, he talks about each note as an entity, as a deity, and it's just such a beautiful thing to meditate on and feel into. I mean, especially the ancient music of India, some of the oldest sounds for human history, the oldest sounds that we know of. And they even say all of life came from the primordial sound, Om. And so there's different ways to explain it. But I think what you described is this full body, multidimensional experience, and that can help the mind still and help the whole atmosphere and environment shift. And I see that at the bedside when I bring the harmonium. There can be so much fear, and I don't know if the word distortion, but can be a lot of chaos. And then when the harmonium and the drone enters the scene, it just creates an atmosphere of cohesiveness and coherence. I would say it facilitates that level of coherence in a way that talking and thinking and processing can do, but may take more time.
I love that. It's like a bypass right to the heart, get around our defenses and all of our stories. So how do you use music in the center?
I just wanted to add one thing in response to that, is it sort of helps, it brings us into the present moment, which is, all spiritual teachings advise us or invite us to do that. The mystic teachings, the wisdom traditions all speak to meditation and presence, and music is a way to facilitate that presence. So at the center, that we have a very talented, robust group of volunteers that all have so many skills and gifts to bring. And so we have music kind of just permeates everything we do at the center. We open sometimes our meetings with just a toning, it's toning or an om. We have music events. We bring song to the bedside. One of our founding directors, Sherry Kay, plays a handpan, and she'll just play it periodically throughout the day in the center. And it's just a beautiful part of the tapestry of what we're doing there. It's a fundamental piece.
And can you say more about the center? And you created this, you founded this. Tell us about it.
So in those 10 years, I was working in an inpatient hospice facility. And for those of you that may not know, not all hospice programs have an inpatient facility. You're lucky if you do, and some are closing due to nursing shortages and funding. So we're blessed to have one of those here in Asheville, 2 actually nearby. But in my experience there, I noted that people were coming to death unprepared, terrified, with a lot of loose ends untied. And I just realized that it's not necessarily the medical system's priority, and there's not many incentives to change that. And so there was just I describe it as this kind of whisper in my ear and knowing in my heart that there was something for me to do about that or with that.
Is it the Western medical system or medical systems in general? Or
I think it's the allopathic predominant medical model of dying that we're talking about. Because in developed countries, I would say, many people die this way. And so I started the Center for Conscious Living and Dying as sort of a passion project just to help with education upstream of an illness, upstream of a crisis. And that after the caring for a young man, Ethan Sisser, who was dying of a glioblastoma brain tumor and who wanted to film his dying journey. After caring for him and being a part of his dying experience, that was ultimately filmed and put into a documentary, The Last Ecstatic Days, it became so clear to me that there was something for me to do with this, knowing that there's another way of being with death. And all we did for Ethan sounds very simple, but it happened very fast, was just rally a group of people in the community to take care of a dying man who didn't have that level of support. And during that journey, people were so inspired. They came up to me during it, like, what can we do? How can we open a house and how can we take care of each other and just do this for each other? It's so enriching. And mind you, this was while COVID was just, was still present. And so we were all hungry for connection and community. And so that was part of the rebound effect of COVID. So the timing was also important and a part of the unfolding. And so shortly after he died, I surrendered. I just said, something is guiding me to jump into this river. And I put my notice in, which was not like me, very unusual for me to leave a path that was secure, and just jumped into this unknown. And I followed the breadcrumbs. Just how we're led to connect to each other. We were, guided. And it led to the formation of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying as a nonprofit that is focused on community-supported end-of-life care. And it's based on the Omega Home Network model. Back during the AIDS crisis, people didn't have a place to go to die. They were either kicked out of their homes or the hospitals were full, and people opened up their homes and volunteered their care and love. And so these homes there are about 40 in operation, 40 in development across the country, and they formed a network called the Omega Home Network, which offers this kind of care, which is really supplemental care. Hospice, the home hospice in your community comes into these homes, provides all the medical care. So it's a non-medical model of dying. The volunteers, or in some cases paid staff, but they provide 24/7 care for people who are dying. And so that's a part of what the center is doing, is offering that level of care to people who are dying. And in order to do that, to have that 24/7 care, there has to be some preparation of the volunteers. And that's where a lot of our energy goes to how do we prepare ourselves to show up and be fully present. So speaking of what you were talking about earlier, cultivate that presence with ourselves first so that we can be a clear, hollow vessel while people are dying.
I mean, I'm sure that people say this or ask this, but it's like it's the type of place that you just want to move into, not to die necessarily, but like just the way you're describing community and the enrichment and the mutual support. I don't know if there's a corollary for just aging,
Right. I mean, I think with our aging population and our caregiving crisis, if you will, I think we're going to have to get creative. The models that exist currently, people aren't very interested in. But I don't know many people that are jonesing to go into a nursing home. So I think this is one creative solution. And then, there's much to do in terms of aging care as well. Very aware of that.
And what do you do when you say you train your staff, and that's a big part of it? Can you just give us a couple of highlights about that, about things that you cover or that they need to go through? Or
and I want to just honor the collaborative nature of what we've done at CCLD, the center, the acronym is CCLD. What has been created has been co-created by people who have incredible gifts and skill sets, like I mentioned earlier, and many, many of whom were all volunteers at the beginning. I think we have about 300 volunteers, many of whom are elders that have had very successful careers and are able to show up and offer their gifts in a way that is nourishing to them and so supportive to the whole. So I'm really, anything I say is definitely collaborative, has been co-created. So currently our onboarding process involves a discovery session where we just gather on Zoom and we talk about what it is we're doing and share some of the logistics and answer questions. So it's just like a date, if you will, but we get to share what we're doing and the why of what we're doing. And then once people commit to that, or once they're interested, they do an application, just expressing their desire and reasons for wanting to be in a community like this. And then there's an immersion day, we call it. And it's a day where we get to connect. We spend about 5 hours. So there's a lot of deep connection early on, I would say. And so the immersion day involves some exercises, some playful, creative ways of talking about what we're doing, but feeling what we're doing, feeling into what we're doing through some practices, some educational pieces, but not didactic in nature. We sit in a circle. And then if folks want to do direct care, which is what we call bedside care, there's a whole another retreat day and an immersion, an online portion, a lot of self-reflection and contemplation. Hannah Fowler, our director of education, has done a tremendous job, and she's very interested in shadow work. And so that comes up throughout the training. And then there's shadowing opportunities and grief immersion. So it's a lot of preparation up front. And then if you're not interested in direct care and you want to water plants in this beautiful home that we were gifted use of, I'll share about that estate really in Swannanoa, you can just do a basic training where you just learn about presence practice and conscious communication and some shadow work too. And so you could end up doing landscaping. There's much to do when you have a property.
You mentioned shadow work in both of those. Can you say a little bit about what you mean about shadow work?
Yeah, it's a term that I'm still coming to understand, and I'm not a therapist, so I appreciate all of you listening who are, is that there are parts of ourselves that we may not even be fully aware of that impact how we show up in the world. And to really sit with the parts of ourselves and to examine the how and why of our way of being can really help just bring awareness to those parts and how they show up in their interactions.
So it's a Jungian work?
I would say, I don't know if Hannah, who created the program, would define it as Jungian, but she's pulled upon different traditions, and you probably know better. But an opportunity to look at our fears, our anxieties, our worries, our own relationship to death. I think that's a big one. And some of that is digging into past experiences of death and dying that have impacted how we view it. So looking at the fears, looking at the doubts, just sitting with all of that, sitting in the muck of it all sometimes to see what emerges.
It's so smart because, we don't know what we don't know. If it's in the shadows of our existence, it's there for a reason, tucked away, back there. And then that would be the kind of thing that could easily come up in these kind of stimulating, challenging situations. I don't even mean that negatively, but where you're really called, like all parts of you are called to come forward, I imagine. And
yeah, and I noticed there's so little preparation for this kind of work in the healthcare field. And so I would notice nursing staff, for example, who are overworked and tired, come into a room and be bringing all their stuff to the bedside, whether it was their stress or their judgments of the person or their preconceived notions of how this family should be reacting and relating. And then they would just leave. They would administer the meds and leave. And I would just be sitting there with the impact of it wasn't their intention, but the impact of what they brought into the room. I would have to sort of help clear it and and that's something that happens, I think, probably regularly in healthcare, because we don't have time as providers to really self-reflect and contemplate and process what we're experiencing in relation to the people we're caring for. So I think that's partly probably why we have so much, a part of why there's burnout is such a prevalent thing in healthcare, because I don't think we get to really bring our whole self to the bedside and beyond.
Well, and partly because we haven't had this kind of nurturing and care and interest, again, I think as a community or as a culture, like of darkness in us and our fears and our communities that typically, I think, don't invite that. So it makes sense that we have these things tucked away, and that the preparation then is, it's like you're giving that to the volunteer who that can then pass that along. But to expect people to just be able to pop in and do this is, I imagine, very, do you have a physical location that I've heard is amazing, and you have a certain number of beds, like people, is there a line to get in? Is there, like, how does this
Yeah, it's a great question. So every state in the US specifically, every state has their own regulatory requirements. Anytime you bring personal caregiving to a human being, there are regulations and requirements. In our state, if you take care of 3 people or less under one roof and you don't charge for services, then you don't have to be licensed or regulated as a care home or anything, which gives us a lot of freedom. So we have 3 beds. We don't charge for our services. You have to have a 2 months or less prognosis. You should be under the care of hospice. And so those are the requirements. And we haven't actually fully been operational since the Hurricane Helene hit Asheville in September, and we had just opened May 2024. So there hasn't been a line, but at one point there was a possibility of one. So we'll see. We'll cross that bridge. I have a friend who's running an Omega home in Kentucky, and she opened a second home. So nothing's stopping us from doing that if it got to that point.
And then your funding?
Yeah, I was going to say, the challenge is with this level of intense training and navigating being a nascent new organization, funding is the ultimate challenge, I would say. Our funding is coming from generous donors, member giving. So all the volunteers are asked to give $1 to whatever they can give a year. Some grants we've applied for and have received, which I'm grateful for, but a lot of them, this model is not large scale. There are reasons for it not being funded yet. And I think the longer we go and the more we can capture metrics and things, I think I'm hopeful. And I think we're part of a movement, a growing movement. So if we can speak to that, then I'm hopeful we'll get more grant funding. But it's been a challenge.
I didn't realize how new it was.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So those are some of the challenges. And this again, it would be so easy to just idealize what you're saying.
Right.
Right. Like I'm in here
I can get real.
Exactly. I was just thinking like, okay, what are the challenges of working in, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to say.
What's real life?
Yeah. Humans, human beings, human doings, human conditioning, a lack of familiarity with being real with one another and seeing what happens, and all the fears that come up in being seen and just relating. I've grown so much in this role in ways that I couldn't have in isolation, because we're all mirroring and reflecting back to one another aspects of ourselves. And so there are challenges that just come from being human to human, and our conditioning really, and our ways of viewing ourselves and others, and our relationship to work, our relationship to perfectionism, all of it comes up in community in a way that, for good, for better or for worse.
Because we just can't help but, we still are these mammals. And, somebody had said, I love this, that we're 90% chimp and 10% bee, because we're hive or flock animals. And I just really love that. And this is kind of capitalizing on that.
Hey, y'all, I love this sponsor, Peak Nandaka. I know I'm not alone in falling into mid-morning slumps, and then I would drink caffeine as a fix to pick me up, but it would give me the jitters or I'd have the drops. And when I switched to Peak's Nandaka, it is amazing. It's made with functional mushrooms. However, it's a 20-time extract of medicinal mushrooms. So unlike some of the other mushroom coffees out there on the market that use grains and fillers and mycelium, this is a potent mushroom extract, and it also has ceremonial grade cacao and other things that make it taste great, as well as support your metabolism. It reduces my sugar cravings and hunger pains. But what I really love is that it keeps me focused and energized all day long. I seriously love the effect. When I run out, I actually find myself tracking the delivery because I love how productive I feel when I drink it. So it's packed with prebiotic and probiotics, so it makes the digestion smooth. And like I said, the 30% cacao butter helps it absorb. So if you try it, I really think you're going to love it. So you can get 20% off plus a free starter kit. You're going to get a cup and a frother with it with your order. And when you shop exclusively at peaklife.com/TU, that's PIQUE life.com TU, you'll get 20% off. Hey everyone, I have some great news to share. Our partner, AG1, just launched their next generation. So, in the same single scoop, you now get more vitamins, minerals, and upgraded probiotics. And it's now backed by 4 human clinical trials. So, in fact, AG1's next generation is now one of the most clinically backed greens powder. They went above and beyond the industry standard in testing and have made a great product actually even better. We frequently speak on the podcast about how important gut health is to our moods, our overall energy. And it's so hard to know what to do about it. I hate taking pills, and finding the right regimen doesn't always sometimes seem like just daunting. But AG1 Next Generation is clinically shown to fill common nutrient gaps, even in healthy eaters actually, and support gut health. So this helps me know that I'm doing something good for my health. I actually look forward to my afternoon drink. I still love the taste. It's a refreshing way to get my foundational nutritional supplements. So subscribe today to try the next generation of AG1. If you use our link, you'll also get a free bottle of AG D3K2 and AG1 welcome kit, as well as 5 upgraded travel packs with your first order. So make sure to check out drinkag1.com/therapist uncensored to get started with AG1's next generation. And notice the benefits for yourself. That's drinkag1.com/therapist uncensored.
So, what kind of things with this idea of getting right with death, bringing it closer so you can be more alive? Because now I'm just thinking about speaking to the audience and sharing your wisdom, unless there was more you wanted to say.
Around the time I left my career as I knew it, The Lancet, which is one of the oldest medical journals in the world, came out with a 40-page commission paper, and it was entitled The Value of Death, Bringing Death Back into Life. And I could not believe that everything that was outlined, I would have expected maybe something very complex, like what does that mean, and it was very simple. And there are 5 principles of a realistic utopia around this. It was like one of them was just bringing death back into conversation at the table, at the family table, engaging, allowing other networks of care rather than the medical systems of care, get creative with how we engage with death as a community. And it was just all these things, tell stories about death, process your grief with each other. And it's very communal in nature. That's the way moving forward to really honor death's place in our lives. And how does that shift and affect how we live our lives in relation to one another and ourselves, which I know Lee Warren spoke beautifully of. So when I think about or feel into the reality of death not having a place in these spaces, I ask, like, what can we do to engage people in the conversation? Like you've probably heard death cafes have emerged all over the world, death over dinners, really fun, creative ways to talk about death and be with it. Because it's not so fun to just get a document and do your advance directives. And actually, that's not enough, we know. And in the US, I think at one point only 35% of folks had their directives. I wonder if that number's changed post-COVID, but so it's not very effective. and most people don't know where they are. So these are ways that we can socially engage with this conversation.
That was one of the 5 principles of this paper.
Yeah, they had like 5 principles of their ideal society, and you can look at that online. It's very accessible.
What is it called again? And we can put it in the show notes.
The Lancet, the commission paper, The Value of Death, Bringing Death Back into Life.
And you mentioned Lee Warren a minute ago. Some of our listeners may remember, or many probably missed it, just because I know not everybody listens to everything, right? Lee Warren is actually the person that connected us. She was just incredible. And it was the first time, my conversation with her was the first time I'd heard this idea of ecstatic dying. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I knew it was incredible. And like, just, how you've never thought of something and then you think of it and it's like, your mind goes open. So there is an episode with Lee Warren that we'll also post in the show notes to tie these together. And she insisted or suggested, and I immediately followed up on finding you. So do you want to say anything else about ecstatic dying, death doulas?
Sure, yeah. So the first time I'd ever heard ecstasy or ecstatic and death put in the same sentence, was in caring for that young man, Ethan Sisser. He had a kind of an affirmation, a mantra, if you will, the E3 mantra. And it was, I'm embodied, I'm empowered, and I'm ecstatic, just as I am. And he would say that even in his dying days. And I felt into what that must be like. It is mind-blowing to even consider that reality, that
So
possibility.
I'm embodied.
I'm empowered, and I'm ecstatic. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, like I hadn't really thought about embodiment 3 years ago. I had felt it when I was pregnant with my children or in other places, but it wasn't like something that I would say as an affirmation. And it's such a powerful thing to really be fully present in this physical form, and then to be empowered to really speak your truth and to be. This is my interpretation. Just to be fully you, myself. That's such a gift. And then the ecstasy that comes from that is just, yeah. So I think the ecstasy of dying, people who've had near-death experiences really describe a mystical, magical, awe-filled experience. And, scientists can explain it through certain places in the brain that are activated that may create these visual experiences. But even a neuroscientist, even Alexander, proof of heaven, I believe he was at Duke, and he was in the ICU for quite some time with, I think, bacteremia or meningitis, and had this profound experience that changed his life, a near-death experience, and he came back to share about it and travels all over to talk about it. And so we really don't know. It's like the last great frontier, right? What happens when we go? And I think being open to the possibility, and Ethan says this in the documentary, like dying could be one of the most psychedelic journeys yet, most mystical experiences yet. We just don't know.
Right. I was actually going to go there around psychedelics, and is this sort of glimpsing this other way of being, this other state. Are these overlapping? Are they the same? Like how does this interweave? And also, do you actively use psychedelics in your processes?
Yeah, the main legal psychedelic that's available is ketamine. And because we're not medical, we haven't quite incorporated that into the practices, but we are connected to a Dr. Medad Goldman, who does in-home ketamine, and he's been doing it for palliative care. So there are connections forming locally where I think that it will be more prevalent. And the research around psilocybin and end-of-life care is astounding. So as I mentioned, that fear of death, it's one thing to prepare for death all your life and practice for death. But most of us haven't done that in this generation or in this the modern world. So when people have a debilitating, terrifying experience of approaching their death with the lack of all that preparation, the tool, like psilocybin as a tool for alleviating that anxiety, and the impact of the medicine on the fear of dying is profound. And so I think its use is really important as we navigate this part of life. And I am in full support of it. But again, because we're a nonprofit and we're tackling the fear of death, this like to confuse
that
it
on
with
too,
psychedelics. Yeah. Well, and also we're in the South. We're in the, a part of the world where it may be
I realize I just asked. Right, I asked that just like
it's all good.
It's almost gotten so normal,
It
when
is,
I forget.
it
It's like, oh
is.
yeah, it's a felony.
I know.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
It's all good. No, but I get asked that. Same with medical aid on dying and voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Like we're in the realm of education. So our charitable purpose is education and charity. So yeah, educating people about these medicines and these ways to hasten death are in our purview. But
Interesting. So you've been at bedside with many people as they passed. What can you bring us from that? Such a unique experience. What do you notice?
I think for one thing, how people approach death is probably as unique as our fingerprint, I would imagine. Like it's very, in subtle ways, it's different. And we're bringing lifetimes of experience and perspectives that impact how we die. And yet the actual dying process is very similar. And so when I think about the great equalizer that is death, that spares no one, it's like I see our shared humanity in those moments. I see I really feel into what unity consciousness must feel like when I'm at the bedside in those moments. And I would say that there's value in talking about death and preparing for death before you reach that point. Because I've seen deaths that I would call, we say conscious dying. And what I mean by that is a dying experience that involves everyone going in with their eyes wide open, their hearts open to what is. So, no, looking at denial, looking at fear and its place and how it's impacting the experience, but really being very present with what is. So that's what I mean by conscious dying. And those deaths and those experiences are worth prepping for because they're so healing. And with something as unimaginable as death of a loved one that you are attached to, that you love, that you spend your days with, that you have built your life around, I can't imagine approaching death in any other way than with your eyes open, your heart open, and in community where you're held in support and love. I think because I've seen so many beautiful deaths and more distressing experiences leading to death, I would say, I think the work that we're talking about, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, for example, it's so valuable and it's underappreciated and utilized.
Somebody had said that that there's an idea that you have a bedside coming to Jesus, so to speak, right? That turning things over, wanting to ask for forgiveness, all these things. But they were kind of making the argument that you die as you live. And I don't know if this is true or not. That if you're a bitter person in the world, and that there's not like angels at the at the gate that now you have a transformation. Would you say that's so or no?
Yeah, I used to think that. And I've heard it said many times by people who have experience at the bedside. And it has not been my experience fully. I think that tremendous opportunity for transformation and healing that can happen if you are present with all the gifts of dying. I know that sounds strange, but there is so much humility and so much interdependence and connection that if you're open as the dying person to receiving, it may be transformative in the days, weeks, months leading up to your death. It depends on the container, if you will, the support that you have and the level of care that you receive in order for it to be so. But I think it's possible.
Well, it makes me think again of like when you have nourishment, when you feel safe enough to be able to experience it in this way versus when you're clenched up and you haven't had support to look at it and you're in your defensive mode, that's going to be much less graceful. Are there kind of categories of what people are afraid of in dying? I mean, I know it's very individual, but like, is it the dying process? Is it not existing afterwards?
Yeah. So there's concerns about the physical process of dying, concerns about pain, nausea, shortness of breath, depending on what you're dying from. So dying is unique in that depending on your disease process, you'll have different symptoms. So people are concerned about the physical experience, the pain and suffering they might endure. Some are concerned about the dependency, the level of care they're going to need, and the vulnerability that if somebody's cleaning and bathing you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's good to look at these things.
I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden.
Right. And that's a common fear and concern. There's emotional distress, existential distress. So there's like anxiety, depression, physiologic experiences of nearing death. There's this fear of dependency, I already said. And then there's the question of what happens after I die. And this feeling of regret and running out of time energy too that can impact. There's fear of who you're leaving behind. Like a lot of young mothers, that's a big one. And we've, for some reason, cared for multiple already. And that's why they come to the center. They don't want to die at home where their kids are. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons to fear it, I think, or reasons people fear. death?
Well, I was just thinking about what you were saying about people, given the right conditions, do like the gifts of death, of them opening up. And probably 5 years ago, I was fortunate to be part of my mother's passing. And I remember there's so many memories from that, of these moments where that I would know 1,000 times how this is going to go. Like, she didn't want to be, she was so scared of dependency and things like that. And where she turned it over. And I said, because I said, Mom, do you mind if I ask the doctor? Because before she's, she's alpha. Do you mind if I ask the doctor some questions? And I remember she was laying down and she closed her eyes and she said, please. And it was just these moments like this that it was like, I could do something. I can help her. I can be in charge, and like coordinate there, do the things that I was able to do. And I would definitely call that a gift, 100%. There's a series of those, but because I was trying to think about my own experience, it's like, yeah, no, absolutely. That opening, there was an opening, there was the truth telling.
Yeah. You reminded me of one of the other things I was going to say. People are afraid of losing control. And that's a strong one, a big one. Yeah, there's a symptom that you might see in the dying process that we call hyperactive delirium or agitation or restlessness. Some people have, this is all anecdotal, but I would ask a person who I saw this terminal agitation in, I would ask the loved ones, like, can you just tell me about the personality of your father or mother? And they would always say stubborn, in charge, in control. They don't like to let go. And so I don't know if it's just like a surge of energy, biochemical release. I don't know, but there are many reasons for it.
And I can just imagine you pulling out that instrument. It's called a harp.
Harmonium, yeah.
Harmonium. I could just immediately imagine it settling people. I hope that we can pull a little piece from the TED Talk just to let people hear it for just a moment.
Oh, beautiful, yeah.
Yeah.
You can also go to my website, aditimusic.com, and I have some music there if you want to look at that.
Oh, wonderful.
Mm-hmm. The music helps. Yeah, so that's another thing in this community-supported model of dying, the use of multiple tools to support someone with their anxiety or agitation, I think, is also what is so valuable. So massage, acupuncture, aromatherapy, sound healing, music therapy, we just bring it all in at the center, and it really is impactful and supportive.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like lots of work is being done, but why wait to have all these wonderful things? Like, I just keep thinking like, oh, we just need community that does this for one another about their, whatever the thing is, and I know that there are some, but why wait? It's like taking care of your house right before you sell it. Like, why not just go ahead and take care of it and live with it? Why not have massage and aromatherapy and community and all along?
That's another gift of death. Like, we post Helene in the Asheville area, the amount of collaboration and community building that we've seen, and there's like a friend V started a healing hub where practitioners come and offer free services to people on the ground and doing the work to repair and recover. And it's just such a beautiful way of being in this world. Like, why have we strayed so far? And there are many reasons for that. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But, goodness. So why wait? And when we're faced with adversity and all these things, everything comes into focus. And that's the gift of transitions and death and impermanence.
Things being taken from you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's like the sacredness and the gratitude that emerges when you're aware of our shared humanity, the impermanence, the suffering,
the joy,
all of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. What else, just kind of as we wrap around, that anything else that you want people to know, or maybe that you would advise them to do? Or if the person listening is like, okay, I want to do one, I want to move a little bit in this direction, or even, I want that in my community. Does anything come to mind about next steps for folks?
Yeah, I wanted to add, can I back up a little too? You had asked me about death doula work, and Time Magazine did an article, I guess, maybe during COVID, where they commented on how the number of death doula trainees has gone up like threefold. People are so interested in death and dying and wanting to show up in ways that are supportive to their communities and their loved ones. So the role of a death doula is a non-medical supportive person that can offer emotional, psychological, spiritual care for those who are dying and their families. And part of it, I think, is that when you are present at the bedside of someone, or if after listening to this conversation, it's reminding you of a time where you were at the bedside of someone you loved, and that level of presence and that level of love that you felt, that it's almost, it feels so nourishing and so real, so palpable. I think if that is you, then there are ways that you can cultivate that level of presence in your life. And if it means starting a death cafe or attending a death cafe or using death as a vehicle to connect to that, it's not the only way, of course. It's just a very potent way to engage with these aspects of our lives and ourselves. And so I would say you're not alone if there's a resonance with this conversation, and that I bet you could find people in your community to gather, to have a conversation, to co-create something, to create this kind of community in your area. That's the dream, really. Is that not my dream? I think it's a collective vision people have, is every community that wants something like this can do it. So yeah, stay in touch.
Again, always on our show notes, we always have lots of resources. So we'll put the things that we've talked about. We just recommend that they contact you, they contact something else, they contact the center, or just where would you send people if they are interested?
Right now, the documentary, The Last Ecstatic Days movie.com is a good place to stay connected to what's happening with the film. Bring it to your community. That's a great tool to have these conversations with.
That is
it's really
so true.
been beautiful to watch that happen around the globe.
Well, so you don't just stream it, you bring it in.
Yeah, so right now there's a screening fee, but there's a platform you can use to show it. So there's different ways. Soon it'll be on streaming platforms, and I think even PBS may adopt it. So stay tuned. You can just stay and put your email in that website and stay in touch. And then the Center for Conscious Living and Dying is ccld.community, and there's a place you can subscribe to a newsletter and just stay connected that way, and then reach out to me through my website if you need anything else. It's a good way to stay connected.
Well, thank you so much for listeners for staying with us through this conversation. I hope it means that we are nourishing you and giving you good things and hope in this time of division and fear all around us. And we need each other. And this is just, we're trying to bring really positive, community-based resources right now. And this has been such a lovely conversation around that. But what you could do to help us would be to just leave us a rating and review, maybe share the episode with someone you think would be interested. And just help get the word out about this platform that has 200 plus other episodes like this that are just rich and full of excellent content. So in the meantime, thank you very much, Aditi.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you to all of our listeners, and we will see you around the bend.
Therapist Uncensored is Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott. This podcast is edited by Jack Anderson.